My guest today calls it a Workquake, and you are living in it. Changing technology, increased complexity, and a pandemic are all tremors that lead to this quake. And while we are now living in a moment trying to create a picture of work that is different than we have lived and worked in before, now we must face it. And if you're going to be working for 2 more years at least, this is a topic you must consider, you must face, and you must think about. And that's exactly why we're having this conversation today. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders like you grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast in the future, you could join us live on your favorite social platform. Well, unless your platform is one that we're not on. But no, in all seriousness, if you're on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, you can join us live and you can get this information sooner and interact with my guest and I and get other great benefits from doing that. And the best way to do that is to join our Facebook or LinkedIn groups where you can find out the dates, find out the guests, get the inside scoop, and then join us live. And you can do that by joining our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. As I said, just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to do that. Today's episode is brought to you by my latest book, Flexible Leadership, Navigate Uncertainty, and Lead with Confidence. It's time to realize that styles can get in our way and that following our strengths might not always be the best approach. In a world that is more complex and uncertain than ever, leaders need a new perspective and a set of tools to create the great results that organizations want and their team members need. That's why Flexible Leadership is here and what it provides you. Learn more and order your copy today at remarkablepodcast.com/flexible. And with that, let me bring in my guest. His name is Steve Cadigan, and I will introduce him as he smiles at you, and then we'll dive in. Steve is a top talent strategist and leadership expert with over 30 years of experience. He famously led LinkedIn's early hyper-growth phase as its first CHRO, building a world-class company culture from scratch and scaling the organization from 400 to 4,000 employees in less than 4 years. His clientele spans all the way from Google, X, Slack, the BBC, Intel, to the city of Lisbon, which hired him to help develop the startup incubator unicorn factory. His book, Workquake, prompts our conversation today. He has also written for Forbes and Inc., and soon will be writing for Business Insider. He frequently appears on Bloomberg and CNBC to talk about the evolving nature of work, talent management, the big resignation, successful leadership, and more. It should give you a good reason to see why we've had him here join us today. His name is Steve Cadigan. Steve, welcome.
Great to be here, Kevin.
Glad to have you here. So I just spent a little bit telling the story that your mother would like to tell, I suppose, about your life. But I'd like to know a little bit more, like, how do you didn't start out when you were like 8 thinking, I'm going to talk about the future of work, right? And leadership. Like, what sort of gets you, what's the journey that leads you to doing this work and joining me today?
Yeah, great question. I would say, I'm one of those non-traditionalists in terms of I went to college and had no plan, and I graduated college and I had no plan.
I still no plan.
Yeah, I still have no plan.
No,
Keep
I didn't.
My kids can hear this conversation. Keep it down. And so I raised in the home of an Episcopal minister and a social worker. My mom helped, underprivileged communities solve daycare. And I looked around and I didn't have any business role models. So I went to college, majored in history, and found myself in a job in San Francisco after graduating that was going to rotate me around. And if I'm honest, I probably spent as much time in the gym at college playing basketball, pick up hoops, as I did the library. And I quickly, after about a year, was rotated into a job doing recruiting. And after a few months, I just fell in love. I was like, everything I love about sports, trying to identify which groups work together, what environments produce the best outcomes, which coaches match best with which employees, just became like, wow, they're going to pay me for this. And I found out I was pretty good at it. And at least that's what people were telling me. And so that was kind of the match for me, was seeing that as a not only as an athlete, but as someone who loves seeing how people handle different environments, how players handle being behind, how they go from being the star to not being the star, and how that works out. And observing human beings, I think, was a big part of my light bulb going on, if you will, to say this is a domain that's really interesting for me. And then over my journey, working in 6 different industries, living and working in Singapore for 2 years, Canada for 4 years, I sort of sharpened my sword, if you will, and found out the places and arenas where I like to do and can do some really good work.
So back with that first company, did you tell them stop the rotations and leave me here, or did you go through the rest of the rotations and became even more convinced that this was the right place for you?
Yeah, I did. I did exactly what you said. I said, yes, I found my destination. And then I think I was there about 4 years. And that's when I said, I think I want to do this for the rest of my life. Let me go try this in another company, because it was a really small organization and there was a small team. I think there were 6 of us. And that's, by the way, that's another super lesson which I share with students who are looking to sort of figure out their first step. I was like, man, I really think that small organizations give you the benefit of very wide breadth of learning, and
For sure.
you're doing everything in a small company. And then when I went to a bigger company, so my HR team at Esprit, where I started, was maybe 9, and the HR team at the insurance company I went to was like 300. And so now I've got experts and who can coach me and teach me, right? And that was a great move for me.
So the pandemic hits, and lots of people started thinking a lot more about, or in different ways, about what the future of work would look like. Not you included. And so you wrote this book called Workquake: Embracing the aftershocks of COVID to create a better model of working. What led you to write the book?
I think honestly, Kevin, it was just a lifetime of observing growing dissatisfaction between employers and employees. Like, both parties are like, this is just not producing an outcome that's motivating me. We're seeing, increases in attrition. We're seeing increases in, disengagement. And so I'm like, let me try to reverse engineer this and think of this differently and see if we can build a more satisfying world of work. And interestingly enough, I finished the draft of my book before COVID hit. And then COVID hits, and I'm thinking, oh gosh, I don't know how long this is going to be, how dramatic or how deep it's going to be, but I can't publish a book about the future of work that has no mention of COVID. So I sat on it for about 9 months, and I started to address every chapter in contemplating where I thought this was going to go.
In
And
COVID terms, so to speak. It
correct.
even makes the subtitle of the book, right? So
But
I
Kevin,
want
that
to.
was a big challenge for us. Like, do we don't know how long the legs are of COVID. And my publisher's like, are you sure you want it in there? Because if this is just like SARS, which is 3 months and done, it's going to limit potential interest in long tail in your book, right?
100%. And I want to talk about the long tail, because I will admit that when the book was first pitched to us and I first got a copy, and now a little bit about some of what we've done around long distance and those sorts of things, that I
Right.
looked at the front, I looked at the back, which I always do, and then I spent a little
Mm,
time inside, and I'm like, yep, this is somebody I want to have on. I mean, I dipped in and read various places, and it wasn't
mm,
until a couple of weeks ago that I realized that it was actually published in 22. So I want to come back to what you're thinking today. We'll get to that later, but I want to start
sure.
with what's in the book, which I think certainly is very
Mhm.
cogent and very applicable. Still, you sort of talk about two ways of looking at it, and I think it's the same two ways that everyone who's listening or watching ought to be thinking about it, which is as an employee, which as a leader, even if you're the owner, you're an employee, right? And but also as an employer. So I'm going to ask us to think about this with three hats on: as an individual employee, as an employer, and even as a leader, which is maybe a slightly different take. So what are a couple of things, either from the book or you would say today, to us lovingly as employees, that we ought to be thinking about as we continue to live through the tremors of an uncertain and changing work world?
I think the biggest thing, honestly, Kevin, is the fact that the market and the universe needs new skills faster than any time in history, and that your superpower to make yourself more vital and more valuable in the future, wherever you sit, whatever industry, geography, level in the organization, your superpower is your capacity to learn new things. And I know it sounds cliche. I know it sounds like we're all sick of hearing be a lifelong learner, but truly, I feel like we're heading towards a world where I believe in the next 10 years, you're going to be hired as much by what you can learn than what you know. Because I need to know that you can grow and adapt and learn new things. And my business is going to be facing new challenges faster than ever before. And so I need to know that you can equip yourself and you're a self study and a self starter. And you've got the growth mindset and you're curious. That's probably the biggest thing that I would say if I'm an employee sitting anywhere. It's like, whoa, the whole world's coming, and then I'm going to add on to that sort of 1B, which is, you haven't said those dreaded words that are in every conversation right now, AI yet, but what AI is
Hey,
serving.
you went first. I like have an internal bet with myself how many minutes we will go before it shows up.
All right, okay, about 10 minutes in, but listen, what AI serves us is the opportunity to double down on our differentiator as a human being. Our capacity to connect dots, our capacity to see things in the data that AI doesn't see, because we've got context and we know more about the realities and the nuance and leadership styles and the practices of our team. And so that those two things, doubling down on your capacity to learn, I call it sort of high learning velocity, and also your innately human skills.
In the book, you use another phrase around this learning piece, which is learning agility. So you really talked about willingness and rate, but talk about that word agility just for a second, because I think it adds another layer to what you've just said.
Yeah, I think, gosh, we need to do a better job coming up with some better names, right? Like we all suffer from like transformation, word fatigue, or agility, or adaptability. But I look a lot at, I do a lot of reading every morning, if you will.
Mhm.
And one of the things that crossed my radar, it crosses it consistently, is that most executives feel that the most important skill that they want is agility. Like, what is agility? Right. So I think agility is, if we want to expand on, high learning velocity, is sort of the comfort and the openness to go to different places and learn new things and move around. And why this is particularly important, Kevin, is because the world of work wasn't built to facilitate that. The world of work was built to keep you and your job family and your department, because the longer you do that, the more confidence we have. We've designed an architecture and we've inherited an architecture of work that wasn't built for the speed and velocity of change that we need to realize as an organization. And so we're in the what I call the recognition phase of it right now. And I don't see many organizations acting on, you know, moving people around, multiple assignments, multiple projects, so that you are getting great peripheral vision and experience. And that's building muscle in your organization. Spotify did something a few years ago before the pandemic. They had a big problem with turnover of their younger workers. And they said, okay, everyone move around, let's move around. And then they realized that the leaders' proclivity to sort of say, well, I hired you, you're really important to me, I don't want you moving around.
I
You
like the
stay
idea of
here.
moving around as long as it's not
Yeah.
my people.
Right. I'm sure none of you have ever been in those places where the manager says, "You don't work for the company, you work for me." And so what he did was, it was a brilliant move. Daniel Ek is the name of the CEO. He said, "I'm requiring everyone to move every 2 years." Now, not everyone, but most people, because we don't require deep PhD, knowledge based expertise, and so that opens up. It's called sort of the fluidity of work insurance policy. If I've got more people who've done more things, if someone leaves, if Kevin leaves, Susan knows how to do what Kevin did.
I've got, we think about that at the very simplest level, like leaders who are actually truly willing to delegate and delegate effectively. You're building organizational capacity. All you're talking about is that at like several levels higher of an idea,
Mhm.
that we're building organizational capacity, as well as you said, peripheral vision. It's a really important piece for us to consider. And I love that we as individuals have to be open to that, and then we as leaders and as employers have to think about how are we going to do that. It's interesting that you say the world of work wasn't built to do those things, but you know what? The world of work all changed in a weekend 5 years ago, and 100 years from now, they're still going to be writing case studies about the last 5 years, about how we changed the societal view of work in a weekend that took us 80 years to get to. Right? 160 years ago, work was 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. And then 80 years ago ish, Henry Ford, maybe a little longer than that, it was 5 days a week, 40 hours a week. And if you didn't work that, you told people what you did. Like that's how
Mhm.
we thought about work. That's not the way we think about work anymore. And yet so many leaders, so many employers are sort of trying to claw us back to 2019.
Yeah.
Um, what are your thoughts about what employers, you've just hinted at that in terms of rotating people around, but
Mm.
what are the other big lessons that we as employers need to be thinking about in this, now that we're still in the tremors of the workquake?
Yeah.
What should we really be seriously considering?
Well, I think the first one is let's just call out the thing that everyone's debating right now in the break room or at home is the pajama revolution, which is, this real tension we have between, let's just call them legacy leaders and a workforce that said for a year or so, hey, when I work at home, not only am I more productive, my life is more productive. And I have richer relationships with my kids, with my family, with my community, and I work to live. I don't work, I don't live to work. And then employers are saying, holy cow, we don't know how to build great culture in a more remote world. We don't know that teamwork is better when more people see each other less. Like we're nervous. We're really nervous about our capacity to create and innovate in a more distributed world. And so both parties have really, really legitimate perspectives on this one, right? And I think
And
that's
here's the thing, both can be true. But what
correct.
we've done is we've said we got to choose, and then we're pitting each other against ourselves,
That's right.
and that's what we've been living in for 4 years.
That's right. And so I think what this, and there's several other things we could talk about. Let's just stay on this one for a second. This notion of, great work can be done in different ways ends up with a question I always get asked, and I'm sure you do too. Hey, Steve. Hey, Kevin. Should we be in person? Should we be remote? And should we be hybrid? And my favorite answer to that one is yes. And they're like, no, no, no. We asked you which one. And I said, yes, it's all of the above. And you don't know, but this is what's really uncomfortable. And what I love about this moment is it's forcing experimentation. Some teams in your organization are going to be great at certain ways of working, and some will need a different way of working. And so that one size fits all talent strategy, which I've worked in, you've worked in, we were many of our leadership business schools are teaching it, doesn't work. And it's not sustainable. And it can, like if you say everyone in the office, and that's who we are, that's what we're about. And JP Morgan's a great example of like flip-flop. Jamie Dimon is a really brilliant dude, and when he's struggling to going back and forth, this is a legitimate complex problem. And so I don't mind where you land as an organization, but I think you need to be really open and honest about having a conversation with your people. And if you say we're all in the office, that's great, but you're limiting your access to superstar talent, I think.
You're making a choice that has implications.
That's
And
right.
I think uh, the other interesting thing is even organizations, and this gets at an important point too. Even organizations, and there's lots of research in the last year or two that says this, and it's not changing, right? We got all these
Mhm.
organizations that are saying, hey, we're going back, or let's say we're going back 3 days a week, and the data says people are back 2 days a week. Or they say
Mhm.
we're going back 5 days a week, and the data
Mhm.
says we're back 3 days a week. So there's one thing about having a policy, but what we really, and I've been saying this for a long time back during the pandemic, is okay, it's not about policy, it's about pilot. It's about continuing to pilot and try things. And to your point, Steve, being willing to have different answers even within your organization. What's the work say? What does the group want and need? Where are they physically located already?
Yeah.
If everyone has an hour commute, that's a different thing than if everyone lives within 5 minutes. Like there are big differences in context that all matter for us to be considering. And we're not going to get it right without conversation. That's what I really love about what you're
That's
saying.
right. And let's be honest, what are we solving for here? We're solving for creating great value. We're not solving for treating everyone the same. That's not the right solve. The right solve is
Or to
how do
be
we
happy,
create.
or to be comfortable as a leader, because this is what I'm used to. That's not
Correct.
what we're solving
Correct.
for either.
Correct. And that, by the way, let's swing this back to AI. That's, I think, the biggest barrier with AI right now is that the first question we all ask is, how can I use AI to do my job better? That's the wrong question. You've already limited what AI can do for you, saying this is the only way this can be done. Take recruiting. I have so many friends that do recruiting. I have all these buddies that ask me, like, hey, how can AI help us do recruiting better? I said, this is the wrong question. The right question is, how do I solve what I'm solving with recruiting differently with AI? Or how might I? And we're also limiting ourselves by thinking about AI like it's all about cutting costs, going faster, and reducing expenses. And that is an outcome we can realize with AI, but there's an even greater outcome, which is new markets, new values, creating things differently, making jobs more brilliant and amazing. And we're not talking about that. All the headlines is like, oh yeah, we're going to replace the Klarna. Came out of the gates. Swedish-based fintech company said, we're going to replace 600 customer service jobs with AI. 3 months later, how'd it go? Yeah, not so good. Because it turns out, like, if you want to build customer loyalty, it's not done so well with AI.
The
you know?
the the, the avatar is not good enough, as an example, right? So you're right. The question, and so here we have with us, ladies and gentlemen, a guy with a degree in history, or at least that's where you started. I don't know, that's where you ended. Um, and history tells us what you just said, but long before we even ever put the two letters A and I together, except in a word, right? And that is, the questions we ask determine the outcomes we get. And you're suggesting, and you're not talking about writing a better prompt, you're talking about thinking about the question differently.
Correct.
Asking a better question will get
Mhm.
us better results, whether we're trying to figure out where and when people work, how we use a technology, how we solve a customer problem. Doesn't matter what that
Yeah.
is, right?
Yeah. And we're limited by our own human desire to feel safe. It's very, very uncomfortable to say, how can you think about doing my job differently? Because now you're putting on the line all my education, all my experience, all my CV, all my credibility could
Yeah.
be, not as valuable. So why would I invite that? And that's really the friction I think that a lot of us are facing right now.
And that's why we all, as humans, will then get scared and we worry what's behind the green curtain when all it is a little dude with a megaphone, right?
Mhm.
Some of you might not be old enough to remember The Wizard of Oz, and I just gave you the punchline. But that's a key and important thing. One of the things you talk about in the book that I think we ought to talk about a little bit is that there are different models for how we manage our talent, how we think about our talent. Um, you talk about seven in the book, and we don't have time to talk about seven, but give
Sure.
people a couple of ways to think about the talent on our teams differently than perhaps we've done in the past.
Okay. I think that the greatest amount of relief and I think excitement I can give you as a leader is to stop thinking about your talent in terms of only the ones that work for you now and expand it and think more of an ecosystem, caring about the people for their entire career, not just when they work for you. The biggest problem most of my clients have is, Steve, people aren't staying as long. And I said, okay, do you think in the future they're going to stay longer? And the answer is, yeah, probably not. Okay, so how many of your policies, practices, rewards, design for your talent have been built to expect that people are going to stay less? Let's say 3, 4 years. 10 years ago it was 5, now it's 4, and the demographic 25 to 35, it's 2.5 years. In Silicon Valley, a software engineer, as you know, stays about a year and a half. Okay, so and oh, by the way, Silicon Valley has some of the greatest creativity and innovation in the most fluid world of work. So something's going right in a high fluid world of work. So what I would say is I would build to expect shorter tenure. College basketball, college football are great examples. Players used to stay 4 years in a college. Now, your best player is only going to stay a year. So what does
Well,
that mean?
unless you're a Boilermaker, but that's a whole other story. That's a different conversation.
You look down the freeway. Indiana has not a single player on the roster in basketball that was there
Yep.
last year and the year before. Anyway, super interesting. But listen, if you have high turnover, I think what we need to do is lean in and say, how can I create value when people don't stay as long? Well, I can teach a simpler offense and a simpler defense. If you have a job that takes someone 3 years to learn, you're shooting yourself in the foot in today's
Oh,
economy,
yeah,
you know? And
yeah.
so and that's part of, all of us were taught that the teams that win are the teams that stay together the longest. And what we're starting to see right now, especially in technology companies, actually, it's the teams that don't stay together the longest that are inviting new ideas and new ways of solving problems. That is a superpower in a market that's changing really quickly. It turns out that long tail domain expertise can be a limiter for you. It can be a blocker for your creativity. And that's really
So the challenge
uncomfortable.
becomes, how do we get people to a level of cohesion that's valuable quicker, because we may not have
Correct.
them as long, right?
Correct. Yeah, I did a great exercise with a group I was working with the other day. I said, "What's your biggest problem?" People leaving, Steve. I said, "Okay, let's do an exercise. Break out in small groups, and here's the mandate. The government has just declared that nobody can stay in a company more than 3 years. It's illegal. Build a talent strategy that optimizes for that." And you know what happened, Kevin? The ideas started flying. Why? Because it was no longer something that they could resist. I have to accept it. And so what did they do? Faster onboarding. And then someone got really smart and said, I'm going to build a shell company so I can move my best people between my various companies and they won't have to leave. Like that. Yes. Let's start thinking like that, right?
I love
Yeah.
that. I love that. So, I said we'd get back to this, and I want to spend a couple minutes here because, like I said, I was already sold on the book before I saw the copyright date, right? And so that there's forget your situation of writing it and then sitting on it and then deciding to
Mm,
put it out. But even when you're working with a publisher like you or I, you write, and then there's a window after that before it comes out. And in your case, we're talking about something that's been a little longer in a world that's fast paced, changing rapidly, lots of complexity, etc. So what would you say today that isn't in the book, or that we really ought to be thinking about, that you really weren't talking about a lot 3 years ago?
Gosh, so much. And what's really great is, and I'm sure every author says this, is I really feel like my book is more valuable now than when I put it out, because the awareness that I need to really think differently about a talent strategy. So I would say probably the one that's really jumped out at me the most is this hybrid notion of work. I didn't contemplate that in the book. It was really, and where I start in my thinking about that, Kevin, is like, listen, every organization I ever worked with had a sales force that was remote. So we know and those people are bringing in the bacon. We know how to do that with a really critical dimension of our team. Now, they're not making new products, but they're feeding their information back to product, into marketing, and into engineering. So I think that's an area, and we covered it a little bit, that's requiring real experimentation. Like to your point, like being in the office, everybody, like if I look at my whole career, I sat in the cube or an office. 90% of the time I was sitting in front of a computer, right? Now, I was available. I was there for, unplanned, conversations and brainstorming. But I think we've got an opportunity here with this hybrid to really build something amazing and special. And what we had wasn't all perfect. Let's just take a Zoom meeting. What's great about a Zoom meeting is that person that drowns everybody out can't do that on a Zoom call when we're in the office. And when we're online, no one can hear what anyone's saying when multiple people are talking. That's a beautiful thing, right? Greater participation and engagement in how we communicate and how we can be productive. So it's not a one or the other. I love the way that you framed that earlier, Kevin. It's a yes and I think the more we lean into new ways, I think the greater our ability to be creative.
Is there any one other thing that we haven't talked about? I'm confident, Steve, that you and I could have a long conversation, whether it was on camera or with a beer. You and I could
Mhm.
have a long and enjoyable conversation, but that's not the purpose of the podcast in this particular moment. So, is there any one other thing we didn't talk about that you wished we had?
I think we hit the big ones, Kevin. The if we put all this together right now, you take higher turnover, you take the shared belief that we're not going to have people stay longer. You take the understanding that we need new skills faster than ever before. I think the victory and the spoils are going to go to people who are rethinking their talent strategy. And let me say it in a way that I haven't said so far in this conversation. The educational institutions of the world are not equipped to build skills as fast as we need them. The businesses of the world are not equipped to build the skills as fast as we need them. We are not going to see an increase in supply of qualified talent. Businesses are going to need to become business schools. That is a big one. The first team to go in a downsizing these days is the learning and development team. That is a self-inflicted bad decision right now. It is, we need to build the capacity to learn and grow our people fast. And that doesn't mean send all our people to schools. That means new projects, new assignments, new opportunities and new challenges for our people. And here's the block. The block is most business plans, most investors are building a model that says 95% of the time you're delivering something. They've not built in a reality that, yeah, but someone leaves, then we've got like 6-9 months of empty space. I would rather have 3 months to train someone inside and get them up and running than spend the 9 months to try and find someone. So that's probably connecting the dots that we've already talked about, but maybe taking it in a little different direction.
So, Steve, I'm going to take a slightly different tact for the last little bit of our conversation, and you've hinted a couple of times something about being in the gym, liking sports, and we even bantered a little bit about college basketball, which is another thing that you and I am confident could have a really
Mhm.
interesting conversation about.
Mhm.
What do you do for fun, Steve?
Oh gosh, I play a ton of tennis, and I've coached my kids basketball, as you can probably guess. I have 3 boys. One is graduating from high school in 2 weeks and is gonna play college basketball, so I'm so full of joy that I can be that dad in the stands and still follow one of my kids. And the other son is started his club team at his university, club basketball, first time ever. So that, I mean, that's what I do. And on the goofy side, my wife is teasing me about this. I am getting into bird watching and identifying birds too. Yes, I am one of those guys.
You are the third person I've talked to in 1 week that has said that to me, literally. And
Yeah.
I don't
Okay.
remember someone telling me that in years. It
All right.
must be, it
Let me
must be
nerd
a
out
thing.
on this for just a second. There is an app that Cornell University has produced called Merlin. And if you are bored and you're going for a walk like I do, and you're walking the dog, whatever, open up Merlin. Merlin will identify birds based on their sound. And I have had mornings where I've had 15 new birds identified. And it's just, I can't even describe the joy.
Merlin, the bird watching app, will be among the things in the show notes, including uh, how you can get a hold of Steve's book, Workquake. But I'm curious, Steve, what
Yeah.
else? When you're not watching birds, shooting hoops, watching hoops, coaching hoops, what have you been reading lately?
Uh, Listen, two things. I am going crazy on Audible. I'm reading a book right now called God in the Woods, but I would say that's side hobby. The biggest content that I'm consuming is probably for an hour every morning. I'm looking at all kinds of articles on artificial intelligence and the future of work. I feel like a kid in a candy store. This is a thing that's changing every day. And it's so interesting and so fun for me to kind of see how it's going. And it's the biggest thing on the mind of most people I'm talking to today. So, and there's not a specific, magazine or publisher that
I was
I
going to say,
it's all over the
is there a
place.
place that's the hub that you're finding that's been specifically helpful,
No,
or just
I've done I query uh, AI and Google to give me a feed every morning on future work and AI and workplace implications. So you're going to get every day, maybe 75 to 100 links. Um, and then here's the thing that I would say on this topic, Kevin, I think is really important for all of us right now. We all have to be students of AI. And so I was delivering a class on this in Lisbon a few months ago, and someone asked a great question, which I didn't have an answer to, which is, I said, be wary of big tech telling you about AI. Okay, be wary of being educated by big tech because they've got a real, they got a reason
they
for
got a stake, right?
that's right. They got a stake. So then someone said, "So who should we be listening to?" And I go, "Oh, I need to have a list." So I'm in the process of building, you know, a list of academics and researchers and thought-provoking people who can sort of help inform me how to think about this. I had Mustafa Suleyman on there. Now he's over at Microsoft. Connor Grennan is already on my list. And just sort of like really like introduce me to stuff that I wouldn't be thinking about. And I think we all need to have that in our pocket right now as someone who can educate us on this.
would you be willing to, and I've never done this live like this.
Mhm.
Would you be willing to share 2 or 3 of those with me that we can put in the show notes?
Yeah, I
Okay,
would.
awesome.
Would.
We'll have that in the show notes for you,
Okay, great.
everybody. Before we go, any place you want to point people, anything else you want to say to people about how they can connect with you? While you do that, I'll hold the book up for people who are
Yeah, thank
watching.
you so much, Kevin. Yeah, you can get my book anywhere. SteveCadigan.com is my website. I have a TikTok channel, which has a stream of TikToks called True Stories from Corporate America. They're all true. And if you want to reach out directly to me, it's steve@cadiganventures.com.
Awesome. Steve at CadiganVentures.com, SteveCadigan.com. Before I say goodbye to Steve and goodbye to you, I've got to do what I do every single episode. It's the question that I ask. Some of you know it. You can say it with me. Now what? What are you going to do as a result of this? None of this matters. I mean, it might have been entertaining. You might have enjoyed it. You might have liked the sound of Steve's voice. All of that might be true, but what really matters is what action you take as a result of being here. And so I have a bunch of notes. I'm sure that you do. And if they're just mental notes and you've been multitasking, listening to this while you're doing something else, do yourself a favor and stop and say, what's the one thing I'm going to do as a result of this, whether it's buy book or, but more importantly, what it might be is, what action am I going to take today? What question am I going to ponder? What step am I going to take now? It's those things that will change the future of your success as a leader and the success of your organization. So I hope that you'll do that. And I hope that you'll come back next week. But Steve, thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me.
And like I said, we'll be back next week. So I hope you will be too. If you enjoyed this, make sure you subscribe wherever you're listening so you don't miss any future episodes, and invite someone else to join us next week, because we'll be back with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.